Once the pool site has been selected, it must be prepared for layout and excavation. As with all construction and home improvement projects, issues like building codes, laws, and safety must be addressed when making pool placement decisions. Most communities have both regulations and restrictions, and the requirement of securing a building permit. These are important matters, and their stipulations must be met before any pool construction begins. Swimming pools must not be built over sewer lines, septic systems, buried pipes, or wiring of any kind. In addition, no power lines can be present directly overhead or immediately adjacent. These lines will need to be rerouted if they are present over your only available pool location. Low spots in the yard are also detrimental locations as they could flood during certain seasons. Final pool grading should route surface drainage away from the pool walls. This is our pool location for this particular installation. Yes, it's a challenge. Encumbering this site preparation is a virtual forest on unlevel land with a variety of shrubs and scrub, as well as pre-existing landscaping, including a working fountain on the perimeter. Every site is different, however, so we'll just zip through this to save some time. There. The site for our pool has been cleared and leveled and meets all the necessary requirements for swimming pool installation. We're ready to measure our layout and excavate the site. Once the customer has determined exactly where they want their pool and the yard has been clear-cut of shrubs and trees and bushes, it's time to begin marking the layout of the pool in preparation for excavation. This pool is an 18 by 36 free-form Oasis Cardinal model that is laid out inside a 22 by 40 box measurement designated by points A, B, C, and D. Start by running a string from one end of the site to the other. This string should approximate the center of where the pool will lie, going from shallow end to deep end. Be certain both ends of the line are securely fastened, as you'll use this as the center point from which to proceed with critical layout measurements and marking. Measure out an appropriate distance from a fixed point on the site to establish the center point of the shallow end radius. Drive a rebar in at this exact point, point E. Next, establish the radius in the deep end by measuring 18 feet from the first rebar. Now stake that point with another rebar, point F. The other radius points will be established later. Measure out 9 feet from point E and mark the shallow end radius. Do the same to mark the deep end radius, point F, which in this case is also 9 feet. To find the third radius point, measure 18 feet from both center points and bring these two measurements to intersect at point J. This triangulation will establish the third radius point, which is a reverse radius. Drive a rebar at this point. Then, run a tape 9 feet from this new point and spray the third radius. Next, spray the fourth radius. To find the point from which to swing this final radius, measure 9 feet 10 1/8 inches from points E and F and bring the tapes to intersect. Sink another rebar at this point, point G. Then measure 9 feet from point G and spray the fourth arc. The last two 4-foot reverse radii in this installation are roughed in by hand. Cardinal Systems recommends staking out reference points from which any previously measured and staked point can be reestablished. These box dimensions are achieved in this case by running a tape 29 feet 11 5/8 inches from the finishing radius F to A, and a second tape 15 feet 9 3/4 inches from point E to A, and bring them to intersect. Drive a stake at this point, A, in the pool layout. Repeat this procedure, marking from point E to C, 29 feet 11 5/8, and from F to C, 15 feet 9 3/4 inches. Points A, B, C, and D are the box measurements. Points D and B are not used in this installation because they are off-site. To allow a work area around the perimeter of the pool, measure an overcut around the entire pool. To mark the overcut, use the same radii you used to lay out the pool shape. For normal radii, simply add 3 feet to the measurement and spray the arc. For the reverse radius in our Oasis layout, simply subtract 3 feet from the measurement and spray the arc. Continue this process until you have achieved a perimeter 3 feet larger than the pool layout. With the pool layout, overcut, and box dimensions measured and staked, and the arc sprayed, you're ready to begin the first excavation of the site. The first dig will remove 42 inches to accommodate panel height, plus additional inches to accommodate the thickness of the deck and any additional materials, such as blocks, required to facilitate panel leveling. By combining all these measurements, we established a maximum depth below finished grade. You'll want to take time during the dig to check your transit to confirm you're not exceeding required depth. Once the first depth has been excavated, double check to make certain your bottom is level and that you're no deeper than maximum established depth. Confident the first depth is accurate, you must now repeat the pool layout as accomplished earlier. To do so, restring your center line and redrive rebar at the appropriate points, and reswing your radii, and spray your layout arcs. Then, it's time to proceed to the breakpoints for this tri-level pool. The first breakpoint is measured at 15 feet from the back wall of the shallow end and is perpendicular to the center line. Spray the line on both sides of the excavation. Measure 3 feet 6 inches for the break to the second level, 4 feet for the width of the second level, and then 4 feet 6 inches for the slope to the hopper. The hopper is 6 feet 6 inches, and the slope leading to the end of the finishing point is 2 feet 6 inches. Once all markings have been established on both sides of the excavation, you're ready to perform the dig for the hopper and slopes. In this case, the finished depth will be just 6 feet from the top of the panel to the bottom of the hopper. This is a non-diving pool. Be sure to allow a minimum of 2 inches to accommodate bottom material. Check the depth periodically to ensure you're not exceeding the 6-foot limit established previously. Also check to make certain the depth is level. Also check for the depth and level of the intermediate levels and slopes between levels. If all measurements are hitting the marks, it's time for panel assembly. Panel assembly. To begin panel assembly, walk all the panels into the excavation and position them around the perimeter according to how they will be assembled. Skimmer panel in position, light panel in position, and so forth. When bolting the panels together, Cardinal Systems' optional panel levelers are an excellent accessory to use to adjust panel height. This is a C-clamp device which mounts to the panel base and is secured by a long bolt. A steel stabilizing plate is placed under the panel as a base to keep the threaded bolt from digging into the soil. We'll start by setting a few panels and then demonstrate the panel leveling system. All panels are bolted together using the inner holes. The outer holes are provided for plastic step units and other accessories. To level the first panel, take a reading on the end of the first panel. Note that clearly this panel needs to come up approximately 2 inches, or in this case, approximately the thickness of a patio block. Place a stabilizing plate on top of the patio block and insert this under the end of the first panel. This brings the panel up to the approximate height. Bring the panel perfectly level by adjusting the panel leveler with a wrench. With the first panel level, you can continue assembling the panels, checking for level, and using the panel leveling system as you proceed. Remember, use the inner holes to connect panels. The outer holes are reserved for plastic step units and ladder panels. When installing the ladder panel, align and level the unit with the panels and hold it in place temporarily with C-clamps. Once perfectly aligned, use the outer holes in the panel as a guide to drill through the ladder panel. Bolt the unit into place and remove the C-clamps. This particular Oasis pool layout includes a rather elaborate bench and sun deck feature. You'll want to install all the perimeter pool panels before focusing on this assembly. Once all the panels have been installed, it's time to focus on the bench assembly. Bench components are put into place, brought to level, and affixed to the panels with nuts and bolts through the panel walls. Be sure to install all supports as required in the pool diagram. The sun deck and bench unit on this pool model is unique and requires the assembly of multiple components. The vertical component serves as the center support for middle platforms and side treads. The remaining portion of the bottom tread is put into place and fastened at the center support and at the sidewall. The sun deck is put into place and secured to the panels. The sun deck is 4 feet wide and requires additional vertical support and 11-gauge support channels. Installation of the top tread both completes the sun deck assembly and holds the optional bead receiver used for liner installation. Note the bead receiver must be installed facing away from the pool interior. This must be facing out so that the bead on the liner will seat and hold. For demonstration purposes, the bead receivers, in this case, mount on the first tread at the outer wall and at the bottom of the first tread. With this last component in place, the sun deck assembly is complete. Now that the entire steel panel construction is complete and the sun deck assembled, it's time to ensure the structure is aligned properly and level. To do this, we return to the A and C points we staked earlier. Run a tape from each of these stakes to the center of the assembly. If the measurements agree with those taken earlier, the assembly is aligned and you may begin securing it in place with rebar. With the assembly complete, you'll also want to check to ensure the structure continues to be level. Continue going around the pool wall, confirming alignments and ensuring that the structure is level, staking it as you go. Make corrections as required and secure with rebar as you proceed. Once all the walls are aligned, level, and secured, install adjustable A-frame braces and optional deck braces and stone coping support systems. Secure the lower component or short angle of the brace at the bottom by bolting it to the bottom of the panel. Then, attach the adjustable support, in this case a turnbuckle, at the top of the panel. And finally, secure the support to the short angle at the bottom. Secure the assembly to the ground with drive stakes. Then, tighten up the A-frame assembly. You'll use the turnbuckle to make plumb adjustments later. Continue checking the level periodically to ensure nothing is slipped. This particular installation will feature a deck and stone coping. So let's turn our attention to installing the bracing for those features. To install the stone coping support braces, place the notch in the lower part of the brace over the outer flange of the panel and install the horizontal stone coping support as shown here. Then, align the holes of the vertical component with those on the support and secure with the 3-inch bolt provided. Deck braces are installed in a similar fashion. Install deck braces approximately 4 feet on center. Notice how once the vertical support is placed over the flange, the notched piece bends during installation. Remember, this assembly is embedded in concrete when the collar is poured. With the bracing installed, you can begin affixing the stone coping support to the top of the panels. Here, a 10-inch piece of wood is used as a spacing template. This technique enables the installers to affix the flange extension part of the stone coping support system in the proper position. Continue the installation around the entire perimeter of the pool. This particular project calls for installation of cantilever coping with fiber optic track, special effects lighting for the outer perimeter of the pool. The coping is installed on the inner edge of the panels, with the bead receiver facing away from the pool. This coping accepts the liner bead and the fiber optics and is Tex screwed into place. Landscaping cloth is used to prevent the pea gravel concrete from oozing through the gaps in the stone coping support system. With all supports and bracing in place and the wall system level and plumb, the last task before pouring the collar is to position the main drain. Run the main drain line under the panels and pull enough slack through to reach the center of the hopper. You're now ready to pour the collar. The collar should be 6 to 12 inches of concrete mix. Either footer mix or 2,500-pound mix can be used. When installing stone coping in addition to a collar, use pea gravel for the entire pour. When pouring the collar, be sure any openings under the pool walls are filled. Here, the installer is shoveling material under the sun deck so that the entire perimeter of the pool has an appropriate collar. Once the collar has been poured, use pea gravel mixture to mud in the base of the stone coping support system. Use a trowel to work the mix to a level plane, working out air pockets and high spots and making the surface as smooth as possible. With the collar set, you can now install the plumbing for the skimmer and returns and the conduit for the main light. Hoses and PVC pipe should be run on top of the concrete. Later, they'll be covered with sand before the excavation is backfilled. Before plumbing the skimmer, adjust the skimmer support system to take the weight of the skimmer off of the in-wall portion. Simply push up on the fixture until it supports the weight of the skimmer, and tighten the nuts. Notice the stone coping support around the skimmer has been indented to accommodate installation. Assemble the skimmer fitting, downspout, and elbow. Here, the installer uses a piece of fieldstone to support the elbow and keep it off the rough concrete collar surface. Insert the main light through the opening provided and secure it. The receptor is held on the outside of the panel. With the fixture in place, you will need to install conduit in which to run power. Here, a trench is being dug to accommodate the conduit. The conduit will run to an electrical junction box. Electrical work should be accomplished only by a licensed electrician familiar with codes for swimming pool wiring. You also need to plumb the return. Notice the notches in the return opening in the panel. This is notched to prevent spinning of the fixture while tightening. The return is installed by reaching over the pool wall and passing it through the notched opening. Then, thread the nut to secure it. This fitting should not be over-tightened. As you plumb the return, be careful not to kink or overbend the pipe. Here, the installer uses elbows to bring the line directly down to the top of the concrete collar. And though he chose to use flexible PVC, other plumbing options are available. Next, install the cleaner line. This is a high-pressure line. Flexible PVC is not recommended for plumbing this line. Once again, limit kinking or bending by adding elbows to bring the line immediately down to the concrete collar level. With all the plumbing complete, it's recommended you cover all plumbing with a liberal layer of sand before backfilling. Often, backfill material has large rocks, sharp shale rock, and other such debris which could be detrimental to the integrity of the plumbing. This layer of sand will provide protection. Then, backfill on top of the layer of sand. Before any trimming, shaping, grading, or finishing of the bottom can be done, you must first stake out the hopper and other levels in this tri-level Oasis installation. First, you need to re-establish the pool layout center line. To do this, rerun your center line the length of the pool and measure 9 feet backwards from the back edge of the panel on which the main light is mounted. Mark that point on both sides. Transfer that measurement to a position at the bottom of the panels and use a Tek screw to fasten a string across the pool from one side to the other. Where this string intersects with the center string is the radius point you'll use to stake out the hopper. To stake this point out on the ground, place a level against this intersection where the bottom of the level rests. Drive a stake at this point. Using this stake as a radius point, measure out 6 feet 6 inches and drive the first stake of the hopper. Continue swinging the 6 foot 6 inch radius all around the perimeter of the hopper, staking it out at strategic points with rebar. This installer has chosen 18-inch centers. Once the entire arc has been laid out with rebar, you'll need to mark a point on the rebar that will serve as the level to which you will float the concrete bottom of the pool. Run a level from the bottom edge of the pool wall over to the rebar and measure down 30 inches. Use a marker to draw a line on the rebar at this point. Once you've established this height on all the rebar around the arc, tie a string off on the first rebar and run it to each rebar that stakes out the hopper. After wrapping the string around each of the rebar in the radius, connect the string back to the starting rebar, forming a complete enclosure. By running a straight edge from the bottom of the panels to the string, you can determine high spots that need to be trimmed as you shape the hopper. Run the straight edge along until you hit a high spot. Then use a pick or shovel to remove the obstruction so that it doesn't protrude beyond this point. You'll perform this trimming all around the entire pool. To establish the point where the second level slopes to the hopper, run a tape 13 feet 6 inches from the center point under the main light, and use the identical technique to stake out the center of the break point. From that point, you can establish the break point on both sides and stake them out with rebar. measuring for the concrete float depth and stringing out the slope to the hopper. Use this technique to find, stake out, measure, and string the second level. The break